Strife is a first-person shooter game by Rogue Entertainment and published by Velocity. This was released in 1996 as the last retail game to officially license the Doom engine. The story involves a comet striking the planet and killing millions of people. Some of the survivors become mutated and form a group called the Order. Those who are unaffected by the comet are oppressed and live in fear. What's left of the human race is rebelling against the Order, and you're there to help them do that. Unlike other first-person shooters of the time, instead of having episodes and sequentially completing levels, you can move back and forth between each level, which makes up the entire game world. The town serves as the hub level that connects everything together. As you progress in the game, more areas will become unlocked and branch off and connect other levels together. It gives the game that non-linear quality to it where you can go off and explore on your own instead of going directly for the exit. One of the first things you'll notice when you start playing is the inventory system. This allows you to hold spare armor, medkits, gold, and key items. I like the idea of holding health items in your inventory instead of trying to remember where they are for when you really need them. Just take it with you. Same thing with the armor. Medkits and armor are used automatically, so it's very uncommon for you to even navigate your inventory and use these items. Heretic and Hexen had an inventory system as well, but they never had a way to configure the inventory keys. Out of the box, Strife allowed you to rebind everything, so you could change the controls to your heart's content. Any problems with the inventory in those games were never a problem here. There's a good selection of interesting weapons at your disposal, and they differ from the selection of other games. You have a crossbow and a rifle for the lighter enemies, mini missile launcher and a grenade launcher for the heavier targets, a flamethrower for some damage over time, and a mauler, which is basically the BFG from Doom. Some of these weapons have a secondary ammo type or fire mode, so there is a good amount of utility with these weapons for all kinds of situations. The most powerful of them all is the sigil. Part of the story involves collecting pieces of the sigil, and this becomes more powerful as you acquire more pieces. I like how the weapon behaves differently based on how many pieces you have. The downside is that your health is used as ammunition, so you have to use it sparingly. The combat, for the most part, is largely the same as in the other games of its time. You have weapons, you have ammo, you have lots of stuff to shoot at, and you get to blow things up. But there are a few new rules attached. You can't always shoot on sight. The game is populated with NPCs almost as much as the enemy. They'll give you mission objectives, items, and keys to help you progress in the game. With some of the characters you talk to, you'll have multiple options you can respond with when conversing with them. The options you choose can change your objectives and ultimately how the game will play out. Stealth is part of the game, but it's not an absolute necessity. For the most part, you can just walk past most enemies and even talk to them. But if someone needs to die, you have two silent options, the crossbow with poison bolts or the punch dagger you start with. If you show off your firepower or trip the alarms in any way, the game goes back to the typical run-and-gun action. There are some RPG elements in this game, though there's only two attributes, accuracy and stamina. Accuracy increases the accuracy of your weapon over long distances, while stamina increases your maximum health and the power of the punch dagger. You usually get the items required to upgrade after completing missions, then you bring them to the medic and weapons trainer to increase your stats. That's as far as the game will go in this regard, but considering you use medkits automatically, it seems pointless to increase your health. It is possible to skip entire sections of a level to bypass a majority of the enemies. This may become a necessity when you really need to conserve your ammo. It just takes a bit of exploration, so the game does cater to a different playstyle, albeit in a limited fashion. The enemy AI is very simple, practically the same as in the other Doom Engine games. The key difference here is that you now get allied support. These games always had a way to get the AI to attack each other. Now, by default, you have the Order versus the Rebel forces. The Rebel soldier is your ally on the field. They'll attack anything that's attacking you, and they do a decent job of putting things down, or at least drawing their fire away from you. Over on the other side are the Acolytes. They're the most common enemy in the Order, rifle-carrying foot soldiers. Sometimes you have to talk to them to get through a door, and they're not a threat as long as you don't cause trouble. Otherwise, they're pretty easy. The mechanized enemies are the real problem. The sentinels and stalkers will go after you regardless of whether or not you trip the alarms. Then you have the massive firepower of the Templars and Crusaders, which kind of makes you wonder about the whole theme of the game. It's a world that looks like the medieval times, but you have guns and high-tech equipment, but the graphics aren't up to par for what you'd expect. Doom raised the bar with how games look and felt, but this was old news by this time, so the graphics that were considered revolutionary in 1993 is dull and boring in 1996. They've done their best with the older engine. Much of the areas in the game have various levels of ambient light, and all the textures and decorations fit into this medieval sci-fi melting pot of a game. The still images for the cutscenes are good, and the sprites for all the enemies are quite detailed, but the low resolution and the simple fact that it looks like something we've seen before is a huge turn-off. The audio for the game is a mixed bag. I like the loud snaps when you fire the rifle, and it just sounds good to use the crossbow. The missile launcher sounds very soft, even though it has some decent power behind it. The flamethrower sounds annoying. Its idling sound gets on your nerves after a while. It's too loud, and for this reason alone, I try to avoid using it. The weapon still has its uses though. The voice acting stays on the positive side for the most part. The more notable characters have voices, but the average NPC only has text. Blackbird is the character you'll hear the most. She tends to ramble a lot, and much of what she says is useless. But she's the one giving you directions, so you have to pay attention to her.
We have conflicting reports about the programmer's location. One says he's in a computer room, another that he's hiding in a keep, and yet another that mentions a long hallway. Sorry.
The music seems very generic. I have no idea what it's trying to be. Is it supposed to be upbeat? Atmospheric? Is it supposed to depend on the surrounding environment or what you're doing at the time? I have no idea. It's a meaty soundtrack that, while has a lot of variety to it, feels like it doesn't have an identity or doesn't know what it's supposed to contribute to the game. It's bearable enough to leave it on, but I don't see a reason to praise it for anything. Strife itself never had much of a history with the community, but the people were reminded of the game when the source code for the Doom engine games were released. Doom, Heretic, and Hexen were brought into the 21st century, but Strife was the odd one out. The developers who worked on Strife had lost the source code, so the underlying mechanics of the game had to be reconstructed through reverse engineering, using the other games as a reference. But the game still has playable versions in the likes of ZDoom, Vavoom, and a few other engines. As far as I can tell, Strife never had a modding community. No maps, no new WAD files, nothing. If they did exist, then it shows just how obscure this game was. But the newer engines enabled the creation of mods for the game. New maps and mods could be made, and they could have all the features of a modern game engine. But the mods for the game have only just begun a few years ago, so at this time there's very little user-generated content, but they are in active development. If you were browsing shareware websites back in the day, you've probably played the demo. This was very short, but it did show off as much as it could. The 3 levels you had access to are the Town Hub level, the Sanctuary, and the Rebel Base. It does demonstrate many of the features of the game, like the conversations and the mission objectives. It even gives you a flamethrower and some harder monsters you can use it on, things you come across way later in the game. I would have liked to have something longer, but this was still a good demo nonetheless. This was plastered on every shareware website at the time, but I don't think that was enough. Less than a month later, id Software released Quake, which was superior in virtually every comparable aspect. Whatever attention and craze Strife had quickly faded away. Graphics don't make the game, but they do get you to play it. Add to that the increased level of exposure for Quake and other games for its time, and you have a recipe for a game that fades away into obscurity. Overall, Strife is a pretty decent game. It takes elements from other genres, but doesn't go too deep into them. At its core is an old-school first-person shooter with a few extra rules to the gameplay. It's plagued by the simple fact that, visually, it doesn't stand out from the crowd, so unless you're a die-hard Doom fan, you've probably never heard of this game until now. But thanks to the work of those behind the source ports, it's now easier than ever to enjoy this game. If you enjoyed the other Doom engine games, you'll probably enjoy this too. If you're a sucker for these obscure classics, then you fit the bill. In any case, it's probably worth at least one playthrough, possibly two because it has multiple endings. So I won't be obsessed with this, but if you haven't played this yet, check it out.